a few folks asking for recordings so they can follow along. And pop up the agenda for you all. How you want to take it away? Oh, you're on mute though, Hal.
I have a tendency to do that. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Oregon Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. We're really excited and happy to have all of you join us today. So to start off, I would like to, so my name is Hau Hagedorn. I am an at-large member of of OBPAC, as well as the chair of the committee. I'm joining you from Portland, Oregon, on the ancestral homelands of the Multnomah, the Clackamas, Tumwater, Guatlala bands of the Chinook, the Tualatin, Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that we are here because of the sacrifices forced on the indigenous ancestors of this place. Remember these communities and to honor their legacy, lives, and descendants. So I would like the other committee members to introduce themselves, and we'll just do it popcorn style. So I would like to invite Emma to introduce herself.
Thank you, Hal. My name is Emma Newman, and I am an at-large member as well as vice chair of the Oregon Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. I serve on OBPAC as a volunteer, but my daytime job is as a transportation planner with the city of Springfield. So I myself reside in Springfield, the ancestral lands of the Kalapuya, and I will pass it off to Michael. Welcome, good to see you.
You too, thank you. I'm Michael Black. I am in Southern Oregon. I'm a volunteer as well. My day job is as the Parks and Recreation Director for the city of Ashland. I'm also a city planner, and I'm happy to represent the people of Southern Oregon. And I'll pass it off to Mavis.
Hi, I'm Mavis. I'm in LeGrand, Oregon. I'm a volunteer as well. My day job is I have a bike shop. And yep, there we go. Who do we have left? Jeff.
Hello, I'm Jeff Munson. I'm the retired executive director for Commute Options here in Bend, and I'm the environmental representative on the committee. Thank you.
Great, and then we do have a couple of staff from the Public Transportation Division, Jessica and I believe Karen. So if you could both introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Karen Criswell. I'm the Public Transportation Division Administrator, and we support the OBPAC Advisory Committee in their role in advising ODOT. Thank you.
And I am Jessica Horning. I'm ODOT's Pedestrian and Bicycle Program Manager, and I am the staffer for the committee, and want to acknowledge Leanne Ferguson, our Safe Routes to School Program Manager, who is kindly taking the minutes for us during this meeting.
Great, so thanks everybody for your introductions. Our next agenda item are the public comments. Aaron Mendez, who is missing from our committee, he has volunteered to craft the OBPAC Code of Conduct, but we don't have a final statement that has been shared with the committee or that has been reviewed. So I'd like to use the following as a placeholder to just sort of provide a framing for how public comments should be made to our committee, whether it is via email or if it's in person. So, and again, this is just a draft. So OBPAC is committed to diversity, inclusion, civility, and respect. We welcome public comments. When providing public comments, please be respectful and maintain civility by avoiding foul, obscene, hateful, racially or ethnically derogatory language that creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. And these are rules that not only apply to the public comments, but but to the rules of engagement for our committee members as well as our guests as well. So with that, I would like to open up the floor to any folks who have public comments. Okay. We did receive several public comments that are available on our shared Google Drive. 3 relate to the Yamhelis Trail, and then another one from a community member that relates to, Jessica, you may have to help me out here.
Yep, there's one from Oregon Impact.
Oregon Impact. Okay. So I would encourage our committee members, if they haven't reviewed it yet, to review those. And at this time, I'm just going to ask if anybody has any questions or comments on the public comments.
I guess one brief comment is that Lane County, multiple different enforcement agencies have seen similar cuts to staffing as what was described in the Oregon Impact public comment that we received. So just resonated with that trending.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that comment, Emma. Okay, so hearing no other comments, and I don't see any chats requesting public comment. Let's move on to the committee business. The first is to review and approve the November minutes. So at this time, I'd like to open it up to the committee members to see if they have any comments on the minutes.
How, yeah, I have one comment, how, just, it's actually the very last bullet point of the minutes when it's talking about the Yamhill Trail. And it says something about, I don't have the minutes right in front of me, but it says something about the commissioner didn't support. Do you see that there, Jessica?
I see it. The new commissioner has been against the trail.
Right. I think we should, I think that was meant the Yamhill County Commissioner. Is that right? And I think we should put that in there. It sounds like it could be an OTC commissioner or someone else. So I just thought we'd put that in as a clarification. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Hal.
So I actually did have a couple of comments. The first one had to do with, let me see if I can find them. They're so detailed, Jessica. Thanks, you or Leanne, whoever took them. Thanks for taking the notes. It's under the legislative focus area. And it said that House shared that the focus of the next legislative session. I think the context for that is that I was providing information that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought ODOT's priorities for the next legislative session was going to be focused on COVID and wildfire recovery. No?
No, that's not our focus necessarily for the next legislative session. The information that we have is that is going to be something that is going to be consuming the legislature's time.
Okay.
Those topics are important to us as well, but I wouldn't say they're our legislative agenda.
Okay, so maybe that specific wording is fine, but then the next one is, I think it needs to be clarified that at that time I didn't have any knowledge of bill proposals that would be of interest to the OBPAC committee. So I can send Jessica that clarification. And then further down under the discussion for the Oregon Highway Plan and the Oregon Transportation Plan, I think the wording needs to be clarified in regards to the demographic work paper has been concluded. So my statement was in response to the transportation needs inventory survey. And so I have wording that I think clarifies my statement with respect to that. And then the last sentence that says this only happens every 10 years. I'm not sure what that is in reference to, because I think the transportation needs inventory survey happens more frequently. So
Yeah, it
you
might have
need
been
to strike
confusing.
that.
Yeah, the needs inventory survey happens every 2 years. The household
Right.
travel survey happens every 10. So we might have gotten those conflated.
Yeah. So anyway, I think like just some clarification would help. And then at the very bottom, next to my my comment about what do you foresee the next steps to be, there's this @ Robert. If you can just remove that, I think it's just a grammatical issue.
Yep, happy to make those changes if you want to just send me the text that you had that you wanted instead. So I'm not sure if committee members are comfortable approving minutes with those edits, or if you want to wait and approve them along with the January minutes at the next one.
I'm fine making a motion to approve the minutes with those amendments.
Second.
Great. So all in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Great. Jessica, did you want to go over the meeting schedule? I think it's pretty clear there. It's the fourth Wednesday of the odd months from 1 to 5 p.m., except for November. And then we have a question mark in there with travel meeting. So.
Yeah, so I went ahead and penciled in meeting dates for the rest of the year based on the responses to that online, that survey that we put online for you all. And it seemed like fourth Wednesday of the month worked for most everyone. There were a few folks that put tentative or declined responses for that November 17th meeting. So if folks have their calendars in front of them and want to work through adjusting that date, I also just want to alert everyone to the fact that March 24th is during spring break, whatever that means for the world in this current state of being. So just to double check that you don't have any conflicts during that time, because that's going to be a pretty big meeting with selecting the grants to be funded through community paths. So we're going to want to make sure that everyone can attend that particular meeting. And while everybody, go ahead.
Could you say that date again, Jessica?
The next one is March 24th.
Does anybody have any comments?
I am one of the people who has a conflict with the November 17th. I could do the 10th or the 3rd.
I'm pulling up my calendar now. I would prefer not to be on the 17th because that's my birthday.
You don't want to celebrate with us, Al?
I'm not saying that I don't want to celebrate with you. I just don't want a 4-hour meeting on my birthday.
Makes sense. So if everybody has their calendars up, we could figure this out now, or I could just send out a doodle poll after the meeting, if that is easier.
What were the 2 dates, Emma?
I was just looking at the prior week, so either the
Okay.
10th or the 3rd. I'd also like to get input from Aaron since he's not here, and Robert, and make sure that we're getting the full committee.
I think you should doodle it.
Yeah.
I make a motion, we table and this thing.
All right, I will send that out after the meeting so we get everybody's input. And then the travel meeting question mark on the agenda is there was interest in long-term kind of adjusting business as usual for OBPAC of sticking with this remote meeting format for the most part and having 1 to 2 travel meetings a year rather than it being travel around the state for every meeting once we get back to in person. We were hoping that we could get together for a travel meeting in May so that we could give Jeff an in-person send-off, since that's going to be his last meeting with us. Unfortunately, due to the governor still having work from home orders and us still having a travel restriction for state agencies for the indefinite future, it's not looking like that timeline is going to work out, and we just are going to have to be wait and see until those orders change before we can consider doing travel meetings. Emma?
Kind of sad.
I just want to say, Jeff, we love you and we want to party with you. So when COVID's wrapped up enough that we can do that, even if you're terming off the committee, like, you don't get out of your party, just so you know.
Just let me know. I'll definitely travel over there. Even if it's my birthday, I want to party with you guys.
Jessica, can I add one piece of information that might be pertinent?
Sure.
The SRAC is planning to have one optional travel meeting for them this year to go see a Safe Routes project and visit a Safe Routes education program. And we were thinking Bend for that meeting, and it'll actually be October 14th and 15th. And it's different than your travel meeting, but I think we might be able to travel by then. And I would love to invite your folks to come to that optional SRAC travel extravaganza if they are interested. And I can communicate with Jessica more about that. But that might be a fun time to celebrate with Jeff.
I'll be there.
Sounds
Great.
good.
Yeah, we should definitely consider it. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we're moving on to the work plan updates. We have 4 focus areas on our work plan. The first is the legislative policy. We're not going to cover that during this agenda item, but we will cover it later once we have Lindsay Baker, who's the Assistant Director of Government and External Relations, here to talk to us about legislative policy. So with that, the next agenda item is ODOT policy adoption and implementation. The first item under that is the Transportation Safety Action Plan. And I have Michael and myself on that agenda item. So I'm going to hand it over to Michael first.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to give an update on the December 15th, 2020 memo on the crash trend analysis report. So I'm going to go over that really quick. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to discuss that with you. I have gone through it. I was not involved in creating this memo. I'm just giving a report after reading the memo. So overall, you know, just to kind of break it down really quick, there have been different ways of reporting crash data over the different periods of time. This report states that they've tried to consolidate reporting data so that it's apples to apples between the two periods, which are 2009 to 2013 and 2014 to 2019. So some of the significant changes that have happened during these periods of time is a lot more of Oregon's rural area has actually become urban. And that's because of some areas based on census becoming metropolitan planning organization, which is urban areas, which would then classify roads that go through there and highways that go through there as urban highways. Also, there is actually a shift of people moving from rural to urban. So those are 2 big changes that have happened. So if you look at the numbers, you'll see there's actually a big increase on the urban side as far as crash events. They went up from 51% in the urban area in 2009 to 13 to 59% in the urban area from 2014 and 2018. And that's the share of the total. But I just wanted to go over really quick table 5, which is on page 8 of the memo, which is the Oregon Safety Performance Target Assessment Summary. So ODOT had adopted some targets that they were trying to meet in 5 different areas. Number of fatalities, rate of fatalities, number of serious injuries, rate of serious injuries, and number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. Unfortunately, they weren't able to meet the targets, or the state, I'll say, did not meet the targets in all of those areas, and any of those areas actually. I'll give you an example. The number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, the target was 229, and the 2014 to 18 outcome was 257. So there's a lot of different things that are going on here. That's an increase. If you scroll down just a little bit, there's some examples of why this might have increased so much. One of those is a 9.9% increase in population growth, which definitely impacts the numbers because we do have more people in the state. There also is some speculation that during the economic recession of 2008, that VMT actually decreased. So we actually saw a decrease in VMTs during that period, and then increase those VMTs again once the economy started picking up, which could result in more accidents, crashes, sorry, and resultant fatalities. So I'm not going to go into much more detail. I'm happy to answer any questions. All of the data is in the report. I don't think it would be worthwhile to just go over every single number right now, but if we want to have a conversation about it, I'm ready to have a conversation about it.
Is there anything that we can address within this document as a committee to move the needle so that we are not exceeding the numbers? I mean, obviously you look at it and yeah, I understand things have changed, but like every single thing, it has all gotten more detrimental to everybody who's trying to get places. I mean,
yeah.
So, is there anything on here that we can kind of choose as a focus? I mean, because we're supposed to like come up with policy and be like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is where we want to go. This is some great data to kind of formulate that. So
crashes that involved vulnerable users like pedestrians and cyclists and even motorcycles increased as a result of vehicles leaving the highway and striking those people, and at intersections. So those are the 2 areas where I think we could spend time focusing on trying to address those basic areas where most of the problems are happening. So as far as on highway or vehicles going off highway, using shoulders and things like that, I'm sure is a factor when people who are walking and biking on shoulders and right next to the highway and don't have separated paths and protected paths. It is something we're focusing on. And with the information that we will have coming up in a little bit about the STIP that's coming up in the next cycle, I think we'll be able to talk more about how we can have a positive impact on that. And then intersections as well. I mean, that's where we're always going to see, sorry about the noise, but that's where we're always going to see conflicts, because intersections are by definition conflict spots. That's where everybody comes together and we all have to, when we have a chance to conflict with each other, and potential for crashes increases there. So we can, I don't know, can't throw out anything right now to as a solution to that, but that's an area that we could focus on and see if there are things that we can research and suggest.
Emma, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just build off of that. One thing that was of note for me looking at the report was that the urban principal arterials and the urban minor arterials are the highest percentage of locations where we're seeing the fatal and serious injury crashes. And so that makes me think to the focus area 2 of our work plan and the implementation of the blueprint for urban design. That's a great document that has moved ODOT policy and design standards forward significantly, but there's still some challenges with implementation, which actually ties into one of my items. But I think continuing to focus on those types of facilities is really important, and also ties to, I think, something that Robert was commenting on at our last meeting regarding safety.
You know, when I was reading the report and looking at it, one of the things that I was curious about is they don't talk about the demographics of the people involved in the crashes. And to me, that's really, really important, especially if equity is a priority for ODOT. And so I was surprised that that disaggregation of the data did not happen. So the second part of this TSAP discussion is that the TSAP is currently being updated, and for some reason, I think we had our communications mixed up, but I think Michael was supposed to be invited to the meeting, but I was invited instead, and so, but anyway, I can report back. They had their first meeting in December with a bunch of stakeholders to get sort of some preliminary high-level feedback on 4 areas of that focused on like 4 different questions that they wanted to address in the TSAP. And I can't recall off the top of my head, but one of them is, you know, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Another is the impact of impaired drivers, and then 2 other areas. But that session happened. They have shared the notes from that meeting, and I believe it should be in the Google folder. If not, it should be there. But the timeline for the TSAP update is that the draft TSAP will be available sometime in February, and then review and revisions will happen spring, summer, and then the final TSAP will be released this fall. And so I think it is important as a committee for us to look at this initial memo, but then perhaps weigh in on specific aspects of it that really do impact the vulnerable road user piece. So Jessica, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I had a chance to check in with Mary McGowan, who is the planner working on the TSAP update, and for the draft TSAP that Hal mentioned, that is going to be done in late February. That includes the recommended actions, which is the key piece of the Transportation Safety Action Plan. And they would really like to have OBPAC's support in reviewing and commenting on those draft actions. Really, with the timeline being ideally around your March meeting is when they'd want that feedback or to meet with you, which since March is also when you're going to be doing that big community paths grant selection, we've got a pretty packed agenda. So I think it's a really great opportunity for the committee to be engaged, but it might require a working group of some folks who are most interested to run point on that. Well, Michael is our point person on it. Hal's been engaged. Sorry. But yeah, kind of a question if there's other folks who want to be engaged in that work in between meetings.
I think Robert's expressed interest.
I was
Okay,
part
go ahead, Mavis.
I was part of the local group that showed up to look at our local plan, and I think that we really do need to make a good presence on this one, because I I was a total fish out of water, because it's all the, it's all the police and the ambulance guys that are responding, and they're looking at the now and responding and going, yeah, these bicyclists are just in the wrong spot, or these pedestrians, they're just not where they need to be, and yet there's no place for them, because I am in that area where we're transitioning from rural to a more urban, and it is and this is really great for getting, like, where are we going to go, how are we going to get there to make everybody safe. So yeah, I need to quit signing up for committees, but if nobody else takes this one, I'll be on it too.
Great. And Karen, you have your hand up.
You're muted, Karen.
I took my hand down when I thought I was unmuting. So anyways, it's not like I've been at this for a year or anything. I'm new. Anyways, so I was going to circle back around to Hal's comment about the lack of race and ethnicity data and that kind of analysis in the crash data. And I know just enough to be dangerous as always. I did have a recent conversation with Mary McGowan and Jeff Sproul, or not Jeff, who is working on a white paper that does some analysis and it's a research project that is looking at race ethnicity data as it relates to bike and pedestrian crashes, incidents. Again, I'm not going to use the right language. And I had that same question for him as he was talking through that information. And as I understood it from him, and I may not have this exactly right, that kind of data isn't collected in some of that standard reporting. So I think part of what his research project was looking at is how do you bring that data in from other information sources to try to get at that factor. So I'm not sure of the timing of the release of that white paper. Jessica might know more than I keep looking at Jessica like she knows more than I do, which she probably does. But so to that point, I wanted you to be aware that it is something that the agency is looking at separately, and also just continue to ask for a bit of grace as with this re-emphasis with our strategic action plan. We have a lot of work that we're still doing to understand our areas of deficiency where we're missing data. And, it's a process that we're working through very quickly as we can to make sure we're doing better in that space. With that, I'll stop.
Michael, you have your hand up, and then maybe we'll circle back to Jessica. Okay,
so did I just put it up again? Okay, there.
Yes.
All right. So it's good to hear, Karen, that they are working on that, because it seems like, geography, you could interpolate some data from geography, but it's not going to tell the entire story. So getting to a point where that is part of the data that's collected, would get, hopefully that'll be part of the data collected in the future at some point. But what I was going to say is, as far as the TSAP goes, I'm sorry if I missed a meeting. I don't remember getting an invite, but I would still like to be involved in this if, I'm coming in from behind, but I'd love to still be involved in this.
So Michael, you really didn't miss much in that meeting. That meeting was like just a discussion and getting feedback, and they didn't really dig into the details of the TSAP. So.
Okay. All right. But okay. So I just wanted to express my interest in staying on that.
Great.
So.
Okay. And then Jessica, did you have anything to add?
Just that pedestrian equity and crash outcomes research report is being finalized right now. So we'll have that to share with the committee and general public sometime between now and I anticipate it in the next week or so. The key findings from that are that in Oregon, like in the rest of the country, we are finding that areas of the state that have higher numbers of low income residents and Black, Indigenous, people of color residents are experiencing significantly higher pedestrian injury and fatality rates than higher income, predominantly white parts of the state. And they did some looking into what might be causes of that. And it is kind of a combo of higher usage of higher reliance on transit, walking and biking for meeting transportation needs, higher exposure to arterials, like higher volume and speed roadways. And there's another one that I'm missing here. And while they don't have the data, it seems like it's a national trend of those areas also having less complete or high quality pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. So those are the big take homes from that, but I'll share it with the group as soon as it's ready to go.
So my one question also on this memo, and you may not know the answer, but where do we not have data for the last 3 years? Because it only goes through 2018, I believe. One of my concerns is this pandemic has illuminated some really bad behavior among drivers. And to just talk about impaired driving as marijuana or alcohol use is doing a disservice to the vulnerable road users. I think yesterday's crash or yesterday's death, somebody intentionally used their car to run over 6 people who were biking and walking. That to me is a trend. It's a bad trend. And so I feel like that is going to be missing from this TSAP update if we don't have more current data. And anyway, it's just a comment. It's something that I've been reflecting on. I think, when we think of driver behavior, that piece of it, that road rage, I think is never really adequately addressed. And so how do we address it in the work that we do?
Yeah, and that turnaround time for crash data is kind of a universal frustration with our process. I don't really know enough about it to speak to it, but I think we could definitely get the folks in the working group kind of in touch with the right folks at ODOT to dive into what are the roots of that, and are there some things in the actions that you all are gonna be helping craft and review that can help address that and put that higher on the priority list.
Okay, great. Time check, we are beyond the time that we've allotted for the committee work, but I do think there are some important items that we do need to cover. So I want to give it the attention that it deserves. So the ACT and BPAC, that's going to be, we'll refer that to a later agenda item. Next on the list is the Climate Office collaboration. Jeff, I'm going to hand it over to you. Oh, Emma, sorry, did you have your hand up?
Karen, are you able to stay for the full meeting? Would we potentially be able to put the STIP item later, knowing that Lindsay Baker has a time certain, 2:20? We have a short window with Lindsay coming to speak with us.
Yes, I'm going to be staying for the whole meeting.
Fantastic, thank you.
And yes, you can move that item if you wish.
Jeff, you have the mic now.
Okay, thanks, Hao. Well, climate, of course, is a giant animal, and I'm trying to get my arms around some of the things that are happening. So, of course, this is related to what's going on the federal level, too, where the new administration is really working on climate issues, and I think we might be able to tie into that at some point, too. And in Oregon, I did reach out to Amanda Peets. All of you know her, so she's with the ODOT Climate Office, and she's well aware of climate being one of our issues in our work plan. So she and I have talked just a little bit. I'll get back to her and make sure that we're working together. Also, Emma is on the DLCD Climate Friendly Community, so we have a coordination there. And Paige Townsend, many of you might know her. She's with Rogue Valley, so there's the tie-in there as well with transportation options. That's Paige's area. And also Transportation Options Group of Oregon and DEQ are working on the ECO expansion. That's the Employee Commute Options Program, where there'll be some sort of a mandatory, you might say, requirement to support biking, walking, transit, and so forth, transportation options, and that would tie in with climate as well. And this is all related to the Every Mile Counts, which we've had a couple updates from Amanda and maybe Jessica and others too. So this is a big thing that we all need to kind of wrangle up, and I'm working on trying to continue to do some more outreach to make sure that all these groups are well aware that OBPAC is interested in tying in with them. So that's kind of a high level report, and I can bring back some more details at the next meeting. And maybe Emma, I don't know if you want to chime in about the work with DLCD, or maybe we can hold that for another time. How, it's up to you. So that's it, unless anybody has any questions, suggestions.
I just wanted to add, I don't know if you saw the Oregon Global Warming Commission report. So they reported on the progress the state has made in the last 10 years. To no surprise, there has been no progress. Right. So the urgency is there, and thank you for continuing to push this within OBPAC.
Okay, thank you.
Emma, you're next with the Mobility Advisory Committee charter work.
Great, thank you. So I did a brief update at our last meeting, and today I hope to go more in depth since a lot more has happened. I'm hoping to do a brief overview and kind of background information to orient to what is this. Kind of the purpose of the work group that has been created to establish the charter for the MAC, the Mobility Advisory Committee, and then go into a little bit of some of the concerns and accomplishments thus far in the process. And then OBPAC actually has an opportunity to select both a bicycle and a pedestrian representative to serve on the MAC as standing committee members. So the outcome of where this is headed is that I'd love to set up a work group to get started with that transition process, to get bike ped reps actually onto the committee to be reviewing projects and providing comments. I also want to note that Lake McTighe is here in our meeting today, and she has been very, very helpful representing the bicycle and pedestrian interests through this process. So back in, I think it was October, Jessica kind of put the call out and said, who's interested in representing bicycle and pedestrian interests in the development of a charter document for the Mobility Advisory Committee. This group has been in existence for a while, but never had any formalized charter. And I just want to start with saying, I really appreciate the opportunity to be involved. It has definitely been frustrating at times, but I believe having bicycle and pedestrian interests represented in the group has been really critical to this process, and continuing to elevate kind of bike ped interests as well as transit and other multimodal perspectives is important going forward. So this all kind of stemmed from the Secretary of State audit, and I put a copy of that in our Drive folder. You might want to just do like a word search of MAC, the acronym, and see if you want to look at it further. Just to highlight a few pieces to kind of set the stage. A few quotes are, the MAC has no bylaws, no established voting procedures, no appointment process for MAC members, and no term limits. This lack of formality and clarity hinders transparency over transportation project decisions and results in conflict and delay. Another piece of the audit says, the ODOT has not formalized or clarified the role of the MAC in project delivery process, and this sometimes has resulted in some potential imbalances between safety and mobility. Some stakeholder groups that may be affected by project design and traffic control decisions are not being represented during MAC meetings. And you can read bike ped as what that is referring to. There's a recommendation in the audit to ensure that outreach to bicycle and pedestrian advocacy groups is regularly performed at the state and local level. And thank you, Mavis, for representing your area of the state on some previous project review at the MAC recently. That's kind of part of what has led to some of this additional work. There's also a lack of clear criteria for project selection to determine what goes to the MAC or what doesn't go to the MAC. I think that creates confusion both at the local level for cities and counties that are trying to determine how to engage with ODOT and when and what needs to be engaged on or not, as well as internal to ODOT. So the target was to establish the MAC charter by December 31st, 2020. That's what I thought I was signing up for. It has been extended, but I think that there's opportunity for good outcomes, and we'll see where this actually ends up. Oregon Live also did an article back in the fall that said Oregon doesn't do enough to reach out to bike and pedestrian advocacy groups about how they are affected by massive state transportation projects, and those constituent groups are omitted from a powerful state committee that is dominated by freight interests. I would say my experience so far is that that is fairly accurate. I mean, most of the people around the table are representing freight or large construction companies, mobile home houses being transported. Think very large like freight loads, which are key to our economy and are important to make sure that they can move through, but shouldn't be the only piece of the conversation. So the charter was aiming at, clarifying the roles, making sure that we're helping accomplish ODOT's mission statement, which includes safety and mobility. ODOT's mission is to provide a safe and reliable multimodal transportation system that connects people and helps Oregon's communities and economy thrive. With the initial meetings, it was interesting to hear from other work group members who are primarily members of the MAC already and have been serving for 5 to 12 plus years on the group, that their impression is that it's not broken, things are working well, status quo is working well, so let's just kind of document what is and move on. That's been the general narrative. So Lake and I have had an opportunity to try to highlight some of the things that aren't working so well for bicycle and pedestrian interests, as well as just some broader process pieces, which kind of leads me to my concerns. So with the process so far, I'd say, Lake and I have been pushing to really tie things to policy that exists and make it very clear as to what the connection is, and focus it on reduction review routes, which are the routes that the state has designated as really important for moving large freight loads across the state. There's ORS 366215 that dedicates those specific routes. However, the conversations have had a desire from, say, freight representatives to really make the breadth of the committee review as broad as possible. They'd like to see anything and everything. And so that has been an interesting dynamic, kind of a little bit of tension there. There's also unbalanced membership. Thankfully, through some emails, I was able to help preserve both a bicycle and a pedestrian representative on the MAC because that's called out in the Oregon administrative rule. But there was an attempt to actually just merge both of those into one position and only have one person trying to represent both bicycle and pedestrian representatives with multiple other people around the table. So success, we have 2 positions, that's great. There's a lot still kind of unresolved that's moving forward, process, decision-making, some of those items that were called out in the audit, such as term limits. I brought that up, but it wasn't really going to be addressed unless I kind of flagged it. So we're still working through some of those bits and pieces. We have developed draft criteria as to what projects would come before the MAC and not. And as I said, we're trying to tie that to existing policies, but there's been some concerns, including just kind of the overall theme of transparency. On the one hand, when I brought up that maybe, road diets, lane reconfiguration, some basic traffic calming with striping doesn't warrant going to the MAC for review. They're like, well, actually for transparency, let's have those types of projects come to the committee. And yet the OAR specifically states that street markings such as bike lane striping or on-street parking are not considered a reduction in vehicle carrying capacity. So on the one hand, ODOT's saying yes, transparency, and on the other hand, I'm asking about public meetings laws and not conducting business via email. And they're saying, oh, well, for some projects that aren't in the statute, it's okay to conduct that business by email. So I'm a bit concerned with that and not getting a whole lot of traction. I think one thing that has been good is that we've brought up the blueprint for urban design, and that's now listed in the table of authorities, which is essentially a document that's attached, just saying like, here's different ODOT policies, different manuals that we look to. However, it was surprising that mobility staff and the MAC members themselves don't seem to really know about the blueprint for urban design. So although the BUD actually states that that is the design document to look to until the highway design manual gets updated, I don't think it's actually being implemented. So kind of back to Mavis's question about the safety, like, well, if our urban arterials are the places that we're having the issue with safety, the BUD is a step forward, and yet it's not being integrated across the agency as far as I can tell. So I think there's an opportunity for more training, communication. There was a statement of like, oh, this is pretty new to us and recent, and yet it's been in effect for over a year. So it doesn't seem super recent to me. Let's see. So, as I said, I think some of the accomplishments are that this Monday at our work group meeting, we established that OBPAC would be the entity to select the bicycle and the pedestrian representative for the MAC, which is great. We don't have all the details as to what that looks like, so that's why I'm proposing today to establish a work group. I think it's really important to have people who have the professional knowledge and expertise to sit around the table and look at more of the technical design, have the time to give, since I think it's monthly meetings and they're rather lengthy and review a lot of projects. There's a lot to cover. So it could be a number of different people, but I'd love to establish a work group and get to work on kind of a transition plan so that we could have ideally a bicycle representative and a pedestrian representative selected at our March meeting. And then I could work with those individuals to kind of transition out from the charter work group, and they could serve on the MAC and also help with the finalizing of the charter, since it seems like it could be another maybe 6 months, several more meetings to actually get the charter finalized. And I think Lake's here, so if she has any key things that I missed, if we'd be willing to extend an invitation for her to speak up. She has, as I said, been really integral to this work for Bike Ped.
Yeah, Lake, if you can unmute yourself, I'd love to invite you to comment, make additional comments.
Thanks, Hal. I thought Emma gave a really good summary, and I don't have anything to add at this time. I'll just, if there's any questions, I'm happy to jump in.
So I just have a couple of questions. Will both you and Lake be stepping down then come March? Emma, as far as the transition plan?
Timing. My intent is to phase out. Lake, you can speak for yourself on that question.
I'll be staying on board through, I think it's like probably through July. The ODOT committed to completing the criteria for which projects come to the MAC, I think by end of July. So I'm staying on to participate in that process.
Great. And then my second question is, the freight industry always seems to have so much power and control of ODOT. Who is giving them the power to make these decisions within the organization? And maybe I should review the audit.
I'll take a go at answering that. I don't know that I know with certainty, but it has been interesting just to experience some of the dynamics of processes and kind of cultural operating. For instance, this last Monday, there has been a facilitator actually facilitating MAC meetings recently, and I think that that's provided a lot more clarity, kind of allowed different people to speak. That's been a huge step forward. That individual was not at our work group meeting on Monday, and I unfortunately had to join halfway through since I was at another state committee meeting. And I did the raise hand feature, and it was just like this, everyone kind of jumping in and talking and not very well facilitated process. So there's just some power dynamics in place that are not really conducive to an inclusionary and ensuring all different perspectives are being voiced and honored in that space, just due to some historical stuff. I think it's moving in a positive direction, and I'm happy to be part of that. ODOT staff actually suggested a future joint meeting between OBPAC and the MAC to converse about joint interests, potential partnership. I think the BUD might be able to be a topic that we could talk about. I actually found a lot of great common ground with Eric Sander from Omega Morgan. He was in agreement with me that, you know, more separation between large freight trucks and someone biking is in everyone's best interest. It's just sometimes there's limited space and there aren't always the alternative routes for large arterials, plus there's businesses on arterials where people have to be able to access those businesses.
And then Mavis, you have your hand up.
I just want to say yay, way to go. And so are these two positions, are they actually paid?
That is a question that I would love to explore more in the work group. I think ideally it might be someone whose job it is, or it like melds with their job, so they could be paid for their time while they're on the committee. That being said, I think that's only available to certain people, and it would be great to have a bit more diversity with the MAC membership more broadly to support ODOT with some of the equity goals in committee representation.
Yeah, that's what I see we're running up against is when I see what's happening with the freight, of course they have a lot of power because I mean, it's their job and their livelihood, and it's really important to them. And we don't have that same driving force necessarily on the bike and ped committee side. Not because it's not really important to us and it's our life, it's because either the people that are traveling in that manner, they don't necessarily have the funds nor the time to dedicate it at the same avid rate that has been historically seen. Anyway, good job. I like it. Thank you.
And this is Lake, just one last comment on that. I think it's great that there's going to be a bike and ped rep. I think it's going to be challenging for those two positions, partially based on what Mavis said. So I think it's really important to get the charter as good as possible, as well as the criteria for what projects go to the committee, so that it's not, left to these two committee members to try to constantly be advocating for certain things. So really focusing the max energy on the critical freight routes and not on those urban arterials that are not reduction review routes. It doesn't make sense that they're even reviewing projects on those roadways, I don't think.
I had another question. Sorry. Can this tie into kind of the ACT stuff that you're doing as well? I mean, not that ACTs are paid either, but there you go.
The ACT outreach, is that what you said? Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up when we talk about that agenda item later. I think when Jeff and I are reaching out to the bike ped reps on the ACTs, it would be great to see if those individuals might be interested and might be a good fit, as well as if they know people in their regions. Maybe with some of the BPAC and local active transportation committee outreach, we could also inquire. Maybe some local staff people who staff a BPAC at the local level might be interested and might be a good fit.
So Emma, next steps, what would you like us to do as a committee? How can we support you?
Thank you. I would love to form a work group and have that work group reach out, kind of do recruitment, see who might be a good fit, who's interested, spread the word about this opportunity, and then probably come back to the OBPAC with a recommendation, either narrowed down to a small list or a recommendation of who that work group thinks that we should appoint, and then get those individuals serving on the MAC basically as soon as possible come our March meeting. So I'm looking for work group members. I clearly will be part of it.
I will help. I have a tendency to take on too much, and so that's why I hesitated. But I will support you in this. So I'm happy to help. There was so Lake had a comment that she entered into the chat. Will OBPAC review and comment on the charter and criteria? And I'll let you take that, Emma.
I think it would be fantastic. Based on what we heard at our Monday work group meeting, it sounds like mobility staff are thinking that Karen Rowe might have some maybe final decision in the MAC charter, but I think it might actually go up to the Oregon Transportation Commission. So Lake, I'm not sure if you've heard back what the final deciding entity is for the charter, but I would hope that there's an opportunity for broader review in between when kind of like a draft is wrapped up by the work group and when it actually gets finalized. And I'm seeing that Lake's saying she hasn't heard back. So there's still some lack of clarity in what the endpoint is. And one of the things that's been a little bit frustrating is it seems like it's a little bit of a moving target since we have different versions being tossed around, and we asked some questions, but it seems like some things are being kept vague. I don't know whether it's intentionally or not, but how I read the Secretary of State audit is that there's a need to provide clarity and specificity and establish things like term limits. So when I was originally reached out to saying, hey, Emma, you're doing great on this work group, will you be on the MAC? That was surprising to me because that doesn't seem like an inclusive and transparent process. This is my attempt to open it up more broadly.
So we are missing Robert and Aaron, so I would encourage you to reach out to them to see if they are interested in helping helping you with this effort. And then Mavis volunteered Jeff, but with a question mark in the comments.
I have to justify that. I asked Jeff because he has some really great contacts. And when you're talking about who can we bring in and do all these things, my mind goes to Jeff. But of course, I am always willing to schlep around ideas with you to your heart's content, whatever you need. I'll put my name on the list as well.
Well, thanks,
Emma.
Mavis. I think what Emma said earlier is that when we're contacting the ACTs and the local BPACs, then we'll be looking at people that might want to join a committee, even OBPAC or MAC or any other statewide committees. So I think that's where my role is going to involve in that. But I don't, honestly, I don't think I want to really get on any statewide committees with just a couple of months left in my term. I don't think that would be fair to.
Yeah, and
members.
that wasn't the suggestion. The suggestion was to help Emma figure out a transition plan.
By March,
fine. By March, yeah. So it's a pretty quick turnaround time. So, but you're absolutely right. Karen, you have your hand raised, and then we should probably move on to the last item.
Yeah, just a couple things. I've been taking notes like Matt and listening intently, but Emma, if you happen to have the feedback that you shared in writing, I would love to see that via Jessica. I have a meeting with Karen Rowe that just got scheduled for Thursday morning to talk about a number of topics. But among the topics, and I think these all relate, which is talking about and preparing us to be able to deliver the projects that are the non-highway projects, particularly the bike ped projects in the 24-27 STIP. And we've identified a number of areas. We as an agency are pretty darn dialed in on delivering highway projects. We have some growth opportunities when it comes to delivery of bike ped projects. There's some things that are just, from any different perspectives, very unique and different about those. So we've been doing some scoping work around that, starting to coalesce with other partners within the agency to see where we can make some improvements. So it is not a surprise to me to hear that some folks don't really know about the blueprint for urban design. That's one of the things that we really want to solve and make sure that our engineers know about it, they're following it, they're looking to it. I think when it comes to who, I don't know who's responsible for the charter for the MAC. Typically that might be specified in administrative rules. If it's not, then it becomes a discretionary flexibility thing. I don't know. I can ask that question as well. I think, making comment about in terms of scope of what comes to the MAC and looking at what's administrative rules seems like a pretty wise place to look. So anyway, so thank you for bringing those comments and issues. And I think I would offer up, and maybe you're already doing this and I'm not aware of it, but I think don't feel like you need to wait until an OBPAC meeting to share some of those experiences with us. I think it's useful and ideal that you work through that process, but if you're running into some things, our staff team might be able to help with that as well. So that would be my other encouragement, to work through Jessica on that. But thank you, and thanks for letting me prattle on again. I'm stopping.
Thank you so much. Can you just clarify the Thursday meeting with Karen Rowe? Is that tomorrow Thursday or a week from now?
It's tomorrow Thursday? Yes, tomorrow Thursday.
Okay, I have homework for tonight. Thank you. I will try to get you something in writing.
I'm not asking you to do something in writing if you didn't already have it. I think I caught the main points, but if you happen to have it, it would be great. But if you don't worry about it, Emma.
I'll put something short together. I'm happy to support that, and I'm really grateful that you're here at OBPAC meetings and supporting the cross-agency work, because really for ODOT to serve the state really well, it's the type of work that you're discussing right now that is going to bring the agency forward to really provide the modern transportation system that the OTC wants.
Okay, so we're going to have to wrap this up in 10 minutes so we can make room for the legislative session overview discussion. So expanding funding policy and programs, that's going to be covered in a later agenda item. And the last piece is the organizational health. I know that we have recruitment on there, but I have two other items that fall under organizational health. So Jessica, were you going to comment on the recruitment?
Yeah, so now that we've got our working group together for recruitment for MAC, and just so I make sure I've got it right in the notes, that's Emma, Hal, Mavis, and Jeff on that working group. Sound right? Okay.
Yes, okay.
All right. So on the other end of recruitment for OBPAC, as we mentioned, Jeff is going to be completing 8 years. No, you had a partial term before.
I didn't have a partial term.
Okay.
It'll be 8 years. Yeah.
We'll be completing
transition back then.
Yeah, his 8 years. So second full term with OBPAC on June 30th. Which means that our May meeting will be his last meeting with us as an official member, and we will need to do a recruitment for a new environmental representative on the committee. So that is one of the positions that is identified in statute as a requirement. And I was hoping Elliot would be able to join us, but he gave me permission to also share with the group that he is going to unfortunately need to step down from his role in the committee just due to big changes with business life commitments over the last year. So he is going to be joining us for the March meeting to help with the Community Paths grant selection, since he's put so much work into helping us stand up that program along with this committee, but we probably want to do a solicitation or a recruitment for a replacement for Elliot at the same time that we do our recruitment for Jeff's position. Elliot right now is the bike business representative, which is another required position per statute. If everyone's okay with it, we can can pass that crown to Mavis, and then do that recruitment as an at-large position so that we have more flexibility on what we look for in that. I think based on the conversations with this group, definitely maintaining our geographic representation and distribution of membership on the committee is a priority, as well as trying to expand the representation in terms of racial, ethnic identities, folks living with disabilities, or other things that we've discussed as priorities for when we have a recruitment. So I'm hoping we can all work together on some pretty targeted recruitments, building on the really excellent work that Emma and Cadell did for our recent under 21 recruitment. And I'm just wondering if who wants to volunteer to lead the charge on this round of recruitments with staff.
So what does that entail, Jessica? Is it writing the description, or is the description written? Is it just reviewing? Is it like, what does the recruitment entail?
Good point. So staff will do the engagement with the governor's office to let them know we have openings and are going to be doing a recruitment. What we would want folks on the working group to help with is to review the announcement that goes out describing the opportunity that we have available, to help craft the contact list that we send it out to, and maybe do some targeted follow-up calls or emails with certain folks, and then to help review the applications. Usually we set a deadline for a first review of applications, get those from the governor's office, because there's a standard application that the governor's office uses for all of the committees. So we get together as a group, review those, and make some recommendations to the larger committee.
Michael?
Yeah, so I've helped out with this before, and I'd be happy to help out again.
Great, thanks, Michael.
I just raised my hand again. Dang it.
Great. So I had 2 items. Let me see if I can get back to the conversation. So Mavis, to your question about compensation, if you click on the link, this goes to our ORS 366.112, which is our committee. And I was reviewing it, and there's this item that refers to ORS 292.419, compensation expenses of members of state boards and commissions. And if you click on that link, it says that officially our committee members who do not work for public agencies should be compensated $30 a day. And I was wondering, I'm like, is this new? I don't know where this is coming from. And we have not historically been compensating folks like Mavis or Aaron or Elliot. And so, and I just found this morning, and that's why I wasn't prepared to talk about it. But it exists, and that's just my question: is should we be providing this to our members?
Well,
and how do you?
Can we get 8 years of back pay?
Well, yeah. So anyway, I found it. You know, that's my job, is I try to find more money for you guys.
Yeah,
on this
that's
committee.
good research.
So I was surprised to see that as part of the law and the statute that dictates our committee.
Yeah, so that is one that I have looked into, and we actually, it's been something over like the last year, been working with our HR folks on. They are getting clarity on it right now, because it's another one of those things where there's some technical mismatch between OBPAC being an advisory committee created within ODOT per statute, but then the statute that creates OBPAC referring to reimbursement for board and commission members, which are a little bit of a different creature. So I'm getting
So
some
then my question is, doesn't statute trump OARs? And shouldn't it also trump like what an agency, what dictates, you know, the rules and regulations within an agency? I thought statute is like the highest level.
Well, because they're both, the conflicting things are both in the statute. And so it's something I've been working on it. Our HR folks are working with the governor's office on getting clarity on it. If we can do that, we need to get folks who are going to receive that stipend set up as ODOT employees in our HR system. So I need to work with you to do an I-9 form and all that stuff. So there's some process. I have been working on it in the background, and so we can definitely discuss that a little bit more of what I've learned about it.
Great. And Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously this supports what we've talked about previously, and I guess that's why you've been working on it, Jessica, because we have talked about this in the disparity between people who work in public service and who are authorized to do this work and be paid by our employers. I don't think $30 a day is going to attract anybody, but at least it's something. And maybe legislators should look at updating that dollar amount based on the hours spent, or at least a dollar figure that's commensurate with the current cost of living. So.
Yeah, and it just is kind of disappointing that ODOT is pushing back on this, right? If you look at OBPAC, and if you look at you know, the amount of volunteer hours that, for example, Mavis puts in, like it's such a small amount to compensate somebody for their time.
I don't see him pushing back. I think it's a lot of red tape that hasn't been pushed before, because most people in my position are so thrilled to be at the table, which I am. But I also think that we're making it so that there are a lot of people that can't be at the table just due purely to the fact that, I mean, my husband is continue complaining about how much time I'm spending on this because I'm not on the floor and I'm not doing my job and I'm not doing so many other things. Instead, I'm here, which I'm more than happy to be here, but I don't see ODOT aggressively pushing it back. I just see them working through a few things.
So it's 2:20. One last thing on the organizational health, and I know Karen, you have your hand up too, but I think it's time we need to update our bylaws. There's a lot of things that are outdated. For example, it doesn't even refer to the correct name of our committee. It refers to the Oregon Advisory Committee on Bicycles. And it has some gendered references, so chairman and vice chairman. So I don't know if that's within our if what we can do, like if this is as a committee, I think we can update the bylaws. And it says that the section of these bylaws not prescribed by the establishing act may be amended, rescinded, or suspended by an affirmative vote. So that's something that I think is important for us as we move forward and to our organizational health. Karen, I'll give you like 30 seconds before we hand it over to, I don't know if Lindsay's on. You gotta unmute.
I was just going to clarify that, yeah, this is something that we do support, that we're working on as an agency in different places in the agency. So this is not us pushing back. Yay, Lindsay, FYI.
Great. So we have Lindsay Baker here from ODOT to talk about legislation session overview. So I don't know if you have a presentation or how you want to do this.
Hi, sure. So hello, everyone. I don't think I've ever been before this group before, so thank you very much for the invitation and for having me for a few minutes on your agenda. So just kind of by way of brief intro, my name is Lindsay Baker. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Department of Transportation for Government and External Relations. So I oversee sort of our communications section, and then also our government relations team, which includes our federal, tribal, and state. So really kind of my office and team functions as that kind of primary touch point with the legislature, certainly, and elected officials. So how I think is how you pronounce your name. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing it. I do not have slides or any sort of presentation, anything prepared. I was sort of going to just kind of talk about a high level sort of the process that we as ODOT engage with the legislature and how that kind of runs with the Department of Administrative Services and also with the governor's office. I was just going to kind of, again, run through that at a pretty high clip and then really open it up to any questions that you all might have. I know that there's been some conversation in recent, months perhaps about the process of legislative engagement, and I just want to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page and rowing in the same direction. So hopefully that is good. I'll look at getting some head nods, but that sounds like a good plan for our 20 minutes. So I will dive in. So the way that we as an executive branch agency manage our kind of legislative agenda is certainly through the governor's office as the head of the executive branch. So generally speaking, agencies, which includes the boards and commissions that govern and also advise them, so this includes also the Oregon Transportation Commission, really have to work closely with the governor's office for us taking any positions on legislation, even if that includes sort of budget actions, and anything that we do must be in very close coordination and consistent with what's included in the governor's legislative agenda and the governor's budget. So all of that at ODOT at least really runs through our government relations team. We stay in pretty close coordination with, I think, of the Governor's Advisory Council on Motorcycle Safety, all of our acts, and again, also the Oregon Transportation Commission. So typically, whenever an advisory committee or some sort of body wants to take a formal position or engage with the legislature on bills, amendments, that kind of thing, we sort of have that go through the Office of Government Relations to make sure that we're working closely with our partners, considering all of the sort of stakeholder perspectives, ensuring that that's consistent with where the governor wants to go. And then oftentimes we are allowed to sort of take formal positions on things. So I don't know if that is helpful to you all, but just to get a process check, it's sort of right, it goes to the director's office. So I might pause there to see if there are any questions, and I can talk in varying degrees of specificity and detail, but I might pause there to see if there's any questions right now.
So on our agenda, it says committee member etiquette and ethics during the session. Can you talk more about what that looks like, and if there are specific rules that you can point us to on how advisory committees can engage?
Certainly. So thank you for the question. Yeah, so the way that it typically works, again, is that if there's any official position that the body wants to take as a body, I think that goes through the governor's office and to make sure that they're kind of tracking that official position is happening. This certainly does not preclude or certainly prevent any direct engagement that any member of this body would want to take with the legislature in their own capacity. I think it really, right, the sort of threshold is whenever you're on behalf of the advisory committee or as a full body, that's the part that requires the governor's office engagement and approval before any direct work with the legislature is occurring. Does that help?
Emma, that helps. It probably would be helpful to just run through a couple of like scenarios to know what that looks like, because it's really hard to take those words to figure out and to think about, like, for example, and we did this with the last legislative session. As a committee, we wrote some letters in support of certain legislation. Is that something that our committee can do?
Was that approved through the governor's office and approved through the ODOT director's office, that sort of formal position last session?
I don't think we went through a process. And again,
I don't know. I can tell you we didn't. They were letters of support for legislation that was being proposed. And I see this more, it seems to me like this means more along the lines of we serve at the leisure of the governor. And if we're going to be proposing something or talking to legislators about bringing something forward, that would have to be approved through the governor's office. Would we have to have something where we're just showing support approved through the governor's office?
Yep. So the way, and again, I would make this sort of parallel, for lack of a better term, to the other advisory boards and commissions, including the governing bodies. So, for example, the Oregon Transportation Commission as a body doesn't take positions on bills, and this is broader than simply introducing a piece of legislation and then kind of like getting that going through the process, but it includes, right, a committee or another legislator has introduced a piece of legislation. And if the commission, the Oregon Transportation Commission, wants to take a formal position either of support or opposition, then that position has to be approved through the governor's office. So that would extend certainly to other advisory bodies that sort of exist within, and I would say adjacent to, the Department of Transportation broadly. So the fact that that didn't happen in the past isn't, I guess, particularly surprising. And I would also say that that was probably in a relatively low risk environment. And I think what the governor's office, from my observation and just experience having been around the process for a while, really tries to bring that alignment and consistency so that whenever it is a higher risk, and you know, I can't think off the top of my head what a higher risk would be, but whenever it is a higher risk, there's that intentional conversation point with the governor's office of, is this something that the executive branch, generally speaking, wants to be supportive or opposing? And it kind of just facilitates that kind of conversation. So this is also to say, oh, go ahead.
So I was going to say, thinking back, I can only think of the cap and trade that we had written a letter on, and the probably more likely we're writing our letters to the OTC, which I see as, you know, part of our job as a committee to advise the OTC. So I can't, Jessica, maybe you can think of another one, but I can't think of anything beyond cap and trade where we have shown support through letters. Anyways,
yeah.
I'm just saying it hasn't been prolific.
Yeah. And I would expect for cap and trade, that was something that was the governor, as long as it was under Governor Brown's administration, at least that was something that was the governor's stated legislative agenda. And so in that case, the kind of typical process of going through requesting permission to approve would have been less relevant, for lack of a better term, because that was already explicitly and expressly stating the governor's agenda. So that's a little bit distinct to my mind. But again, I think to my mind, it's really just a matter of, you know, the sort of consistency, the coordination. I feel like I'm a broken record, so my apologies. But just to sort of make sure that we're having that level of conversation with the governor's office whenever we're going to go through the process of taking a position. And then just for contextual awareness, perhaps, we actually have asked to oppose one bill this session already. And that's been a pretty quick turnaround time. So the piece about, does the process itself take a long time? It often doesn't. And the governor's office is incredibly responsive. And I think being able to flag for them, hey, this is coming up, it's going to get a hearing, we really want to engage, and can we do that? And are you comfortable with that? I think people are really responsive during session. And so it doesn't usually function as a bottleneck, if that was ever a concern or a piece of, you know, thinking.
Emma, you had your hand raised.
That's a great segue. Lindsay, thank you just so much for being here to provide clarity. What you were just speaking about relates to my question of what is the way to initiate the process to get something approved through governor's office to have a position, and what is the timeline associated with that, given that we only meet every other month and the legislative session's pretty quick paced? Like, I hope that process doesn't prevent our ability to engage, but I just want to understand very clearly what that looks like.
Certainly. So what I would probably recommend or sort of throw out is, feel free to reach out to me, and whether that's through Jessica or through Karen, all of from whenever ODOT requests permission to support or oppose a bill, that always goes through my office. And so I'm always happy to have a conversation. And then in sort of conjunction with that, I think it's also, there's a lot of value in, where do you as a body want to go? What are you trying to accomplish? And how can I help sort of strategize around how do we move something through the Capitol building, right? And so I think that partnership I would certainly very much appreciate and really be interested in, just because I haven't worked very closely with this advisory committee in particular in the past. So if there are bills that you all want to engage on directly, or ranging the gamut from work amendments to just submit a letter of support, I would be really happy to be your point of contact and working with Karen and Jessica and then folks on my team to make sure that we're doing what we can to get it the most successful outcome. Does that help, Emma?
Yeah, that definitely does help. Do you have a sense of what the time frame from, like, say OBPAC has a meeting, we say, yes, we want to write a draft letter and process it, to actually getting it before the legislators?
Sure. So I think a couple of things. One, session timelines and timeframes are pretty prescriptive, because the legislative calendar has all of those very sort of hard and fast deadlines embedded within them. The first major one is really that kind of end of March, early April timeframe. That said, that's sort of in a typical setting, which is not what we're in now because we're in a virtual setting. So what I mean when I say that is all the deadlines, sort of the procedural, posting deadlines, work session deadlines, first chamber deadlines, all of those are pretty similar this virtual session to what they have been in years past. However, the process itself is really slowed down. And that was by design, right? That is a feature, not a flaw. And it's really to ensure that the level of public engagement and sort of access into the process is replicated as much as possible in this environment. So this is my very long way of saying, I think that if you all decide, had your bill stack and knew exactly which bills you wanted to engage in, you could take a vote, presumably from this body, and then figure out what position you wanted to. I think it would be sort of advising ODOT what position you want us to be taking. We can have that conversation. We can turn, right, if we get the green light from the governor's office, we can turn that around in a relatively short timeline. And then it would probably be me, perhaps one of you, Karen, whoever it is, going and having conversations with legislators. And that would be when's it getting posted for a hearing? How do you all best engage in that public hearing process? How do we start working with stakeholders, I think of cities and counties in particular, in how we sort of inform that? That was a little rambly, so sorry, but does that help?
Yeah, it's painting a more clear picture.
Okay.
I guess my only other thought, I think there was an email from Jessica when she was helping research some of this, that for the 2023 legislative session, bills need to be to ODOT or introduced by fall of this year. Can you give us a little bit more sense of, with this upcoming calendar year, when should we be queuing things up to get them into the 23 legislative session?
Yeah, absolutely. So the process that executive branch agencies have to engage in order to bring forward legislation is really specific and really prescriptive, and is outlined by DAS in the governor's office and also the Office of Legislative Counsel. So a couple things from the jump. One, executive branch agencies are only allowed to request legislation in regular, long, odd-numbered year sessions. For short sessions, the governor only has 5 bills, and they are rarely agency bills. So we have kind of a two-phase approach. So in advance of a long, regular, odd-numbered year session, our concepts are due to DAS and the governor's office, usually in the kind of early April timeframe. So that would be early April of 2022. Before that, because we are an agency that has a governing, the Oregon Transportation Commission as a governing body, we have to get all of the concepts that we want to advance forward approved by the commission prior to that April deadline. So that really means that we are starting our concept development internal to ODOT, that then, has to go through our process of talking to director's office, all of our division administrators, making sure that the budget implications are fully contemplated, and that all starts usually in the sort of October, November timeframe. So that's right about when, I usually say we get done with a long session, 4th of July, everybody takes a beat, and then we start cranking on what does our 2023 agenda look like, and then getting ready for subsequent session. Does that make sense?
That does, yeah. So I'm noting that heading into late summer, fall, we should be communicating about the 23 session.
But for example, if there's something happening this session, if there's a bill this group cares about, you are able to engage on that bill, you know, through us, through Lindsay at the governor's office. It doesn't mean you have to wait until 2023.
Absolutely.
Mavis, you have your hand up.
I was just going to clarify that. So we don't need permission necessarily to send things to the OTC, but if we ever wanted to go beyond that, then we need to send it through the governors. And Emmett and Jessica are really great with organizing in calendars, so we are not going to miss that if we decide something is super important. Correct? Perfect.
Great.
Yep,
Does
and I
anybody
am
else?
pretty much on orders during legislative session to drop everything and do whatever Lindsay tells me to, whatever Karen tells me to. I'm under orders to drop everything and do whatever Karen tells me to right away. But so if there are things that come up, I will make sure that we get things rolling on the timeline that we need to hit.
One other thing that might be helpful to have just a little bit more clarification. So I understand the OBPAC piece, but if we are engaging as individuals, what steps do we need to take or not take to engage with the legislature, like outside of our OBPAC role, given that we are OBPAC members?
Yeah, so that's perfect timing. I had a conversation with the governor's office literally this morning about that. So I think from the governor's perspective, and certainly from my perspective, it's just your membership and participation on this committee does not preclude anything that you would do as a private citizen, obviously. So I think the real crux and piece to keep in mind is what hat are you wearing, and whenever you're talking, be really clear about what hat you're wearing. So if you're Emma, human Oregonian, you can do whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. But if you're Emma, vice chair of the Oregon Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, that sort of symbolism, I guess, for lack of a better term, has to be more intentional. So that's the only, I think, piece I'd say is a little bit of it's a judgment call, and also it's a just clarity on which hat you're wearing in the moment. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Getting head on. Okay, yeah. And then the other piece I was saying, Jessica, you made me think about as you were talking, is session is really, I mean, you all know this, you've been around, session's really fast paced and it changes constantly. And the number of times I've seen one piece of legislation, amendment, fiscal, whatever it is, change and then change back again and then change again in the course of like a 4-hour period is not at all uncommon or unprecedented. And so this is really just my way of saying things are sort of crazy, but also we know that. And I think, we are very comfortable navigating through the crazy. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you see something that looks like an amendment is going fast and furious, or a bill is going somewhere and you want to engage and you want to figure out the best way to navigate through the process. That's literally what I'm here for. So please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything that you want to kind of talk through or sort of strategize about, because I think that'll help all of us be, I think, more successful just generally as we work with our legislative partners.
I think I might adopt "we're very comfortable navigating through the crazy" as the new ODOT active transportation program motto.
So I just want to make sure that we are being comprehensive and, taking advantage of your time. This has been really useful, Lindsay. So I really appreciate you attending the meeting and then sharing all of your knowledge and with us. So again, so that's the etiquette piece. What are there ethical implications for us to consider as we conduct our business, as far as working with on legislation?
Yeah, so I guess to be totally honest, there's nothing that pops out in my mind that's an ethical consideration that is specific to your participation and your role as an advisory committee. I think about the way that we engage with the legislature is ethical hard stop, right? We make sure that we have the best interest of Oregonians in mind. We make sure that we're providing accurate, timely, truthful, comprehensive information. I can't think of anything that sort of specifically flags for me as needing consideration, but I would also, I guess, reference perhaps that there is I think a guidance document or handbook, I don't know what the right terminology is, that's put out by the governor's office that actually is sort of the training sort of thing for boards and commissions. And I expect that there are ethical or there are ethics sort of pieces and provisions within that might be worth taking a look at and just kind of refreshing, but there's nothing other than that kind of stands out for me.
Yeah, I recently just did take a look at that, and there wasn't anything that specifically related to just interaction on legislation. And so I was, I'm like, am I missing something? Is there another document? So thanks again for clarifying that piece of information. Are there other questions that, since we have Lindsay here, are there any other questions that we'd like to ask her?
I do.
Sorry. Oh, yeah. So Mavis, I wasn't sure if you raised your hand again or if you forgot to put it down. So
I forgot to put it down, but I have something else to say.
Okay,
so here we go.
Go ahead, Mavis.
I'm not the chair of the Safe Routes to School anymore, but where does that fall within this tier? I mean, can they send a letter? So if they have a stance on something, would they send it to the OBPAC? Would they send it to the OTEC? Or could they go all the way to legislation? Since you're here.
Yeah, so I would have a couple things. One, I would have to take a look at the enabling statute for Safe Routes to School. It was always my understanding that it was really project selection, but that might be my own misunderstanding. The one thing I would say is it's important to recognize the sort of statute and, again, the enabling legislation that created the body to begin with, and that really articulates the role and the charge of the advisory committee, board, whatever it's called. And so anything that is included in there is fair game, right? Anything that is that's not expressly and explicitly included as an action or a charge to the body is therefore not within its scope. And so I would have to go back and look at the Safe Routes to School one in particular, but I would imagine that it's roughly similar as the OBPAC committee, which is a sort of advisory in nature and certainly advisory to ODOT, advisory to the commission, and then if ever it wanted to take that sort of next step and advise the legislature, that would need to be in coordination and consistent with the governor's office.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions, Mavis, or is your hand just accidentally still up? Okay, so let's move on to.
I have a quick question regarding this session, but I'm not sure that Lindsay needs to stay for it. I just want to appreciate you coming and sharing with us. I know that you had to get on to another meeting, so thank you. My question is there a way that we as OBPAC can establish a process to more effectively engage this session if that's of interest to us? And maybe this relates to bills that are being introduced. But recognizing that we only meet every other month and the session is fast paced, do we have the opportunity to kind of delegate some stuff to Hal as the legislative lead, or anything we want to discuss regarding process to effectively engage? And of course, I want to uphold, public meetings laws, and I think there's value in the group discussion, but I also want to be nimble and responsive. I guess I'm going to make a proposal, and then I will look to Lindsay to say, no, that's wacky. So if this committee were to say, as a body, take action to say, we support, this legislation or this legislation, but we have these concerns or whatever, and authorizing how to speak on behalf of the committee and working with ODOT up through the governor's office to work on, whatever amendments or whatever is needed. That might be one approach. I don't know if that kind of action is broad enough or far enough, but there might also be times when Hal would want to, come back to the committee as a whole. So I don't know if you want to have Hal just as a human and as a person, because you trust her, separately and aside from this committee to engage with Lindsay. I think that, and I'm looking at Lindsay to tell me, no, that's not right, Karen, that is something that we could also do. And I'm saying this, just in part because of sort of the unique circumstances of bike ped in Oregon. Is that, and tell me if I'm wrong, Lindsay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I don't think you're wrong. I guess the one thing I would say is I don't know that we y'all have to recreate the wheel. So we have a lot of advisory committees, and I am confident that there are others that are similarly situated. I do not know personally. I'm trying to think. I know I referenced earlier the governor's advisory committee on motorcycle safety. We also have an advisory committee on DUII. They are in this sort of similar space of how do we effectively engage, how do we ensure that we're sufficiently nimble and able to be responsive in real time. So what might be helpful and productive is to sort of just go back and take a look at how other, not only the two of them, but how other bodies that advisory to ODOT engage in this space. And that might give us some good lessons learned. I think from a threshold standpoint, Karen, what you articulate in sort of a delegated model or something like that makes a lot of sense. The other thing I would say is the majority of bills in terms of what is the universe of things the legislature is contemplating in a given session is generally mostly fixed and mostly known by that kind of mid-February, end of February timeframe, because you get to a point where they're not really allowed to introduce additional legislation. And so there might be some just like process pieces that we can work with you all to make sure that you kind of know that sort of broad universe of things that you might want to engage in. And then we can sort of just share information back and forth about how they're going. So there's some thinking that we can probably do offline and then maybe bring it back to this group. But I think generally, Karen, yeah, that sounds roughly correct.
Great. As usual, we are like running out of time and we haven't even started talking about the bills that are of interest to OBPAC. And there are so many thank you, Lindsay. It's been great having you.
Thank you very much for having me. It was great to see and meet all of you, and I will look forward to hearing from some of you probably in the future. But
great.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye. So I went ahead and I looked. There are so many bills that are that have been introduced to the Transportation Committee, and these are the ones that I flagged that would have potential interest and how it fits into the OBPAC work plan. And I'm going to go through these just really quickly, but for ease, in column B under the bill number, it links directly to the language of the bill. And so it'll be easy for you to switch from the spreadsheet to the actual legislation. So the first bill is SB 395, and this is the one that relates to updating the Oregon bike bill. And we can talk about it in depth at a future meeting, but I just want to highlight some of the updates to the bill. The first is that the law will apply to resurfacing projects. There is a piece in there that talks about exemptions only if the cost exceeds 20% of a project. It also is requesting an increase of the minimum annual expenditures from 1% to 5% of state highway funds. And then it does ask that agencies submit an annual report to the governor or Joint Committee on Transportation for any exemptions to the bill. So similarly, this is asking for an update to the statute that governs OBPAC as well. And so some of the changes to that legislation is to increase the number of OBPAC members to 11, and then also adding the accountability and transparency piece where OBPAC will have increased accountability for ensuring that the statute, the bike bill, is implemented across the state. And so those are the highlights of SB 395. It's being sponsored by Senator Przanski down in Eugene, and the Street Trust here in Portland worked with him closely on pushing that legislation forward. The second bill that may be of interest to the committee is House Bill 2783, and it talks about the privilege tax. And again, I don't know the nuances of this bill, but it does impact, I believe the bike tax is part of the privilege tax, may or may not be. It isn't. Jessica's shaking her head. So if it isn't, we can remove it, but I just wanted to flag that in the event that this includes any changes to the bike tax.
Yeah, a portion of the privilege tax gets mixed in with the bike tax and goes into the multimodal active transportation fund. But they're separate taxes.
Okay.
In statute.
So, but I did not get a chance to look at that, the language of that bill closely. So H Bill 2985 relates to the membership of the advisory committees. And in this bill, OBPAC is named as one of those committees. And basically, the summary of the bill is to increase the racial, ethnic, and ability composition of these boards. For some reason, that bill has not been introduced. So, or sent to a committee, I believe, but it's one to watch. House Bill 2191 talks about electric vehicles. I just put this on here because I think it's really important to just keep track of sort of the electric vehicle discussion and how electric vehicles are defined in the state. So will it consider e-bikes, for example? It's just something that I'm flagging. I'm not quite sure like how it really will impact our work, but I thought it's just something that we should just keep an eye on. House Bill 2290, this relates to transportation electrification. And again, it requires that state parks and recs develop and implement charging stations. And to me, if you're going to have charging stations for electric vehicles, would this also include charging stations for bikes? So that's why it's on there. And then the last one that is of interest to us is House Bill 2917, and this relates to the selection criteria for transportation projects. And so it specifically names the STIP and Connect Oregon, and that that transportation projects need to consider whether it negatively impacts underserved communities. And so this was just a quick look at these bills. I don't know if others have flagged other bills that our committee need to keep an eye on. But I guess the one that I think is missing and I thought was being discussed is the 3 classification for electric bikes. So, and I couldn't find it, Emma couldn't find it in the proposed bills. So I'm just throwing it out there to see if anybody knows of that.
So that one, the last conversation I had with some folks from Oregon Energy, what is the C in there? Coalition. There is the 3-class system for e-bikes that People for Bikes has proposed nationwide, being floated around. If it shows up, it is probably most likely to show up in an omnibus bill from the Transportation Committee, but haven't seen it pop up anywhere yet. But we're keeping an eye out for it, and we'll.
Okay, great. So just a quick overview on the second tab. I just wanted to flag the folks who are on the Transportation Committee. So whether we push through some of the support through our committee, or if you want to do it on your own, if there are senators or representatives that are within your jurisdiction on the committee, you know, you as a private citizen can contact them and connect with them on these issues. So with that, just opening it up for quick questions. Anybody have any questions, thoughts, concerns? Oh, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. How just fabulous job compiling all that and good report to us. Very good. Yeah, thumbs up, Emma. You're right. So House Bill 395, the first one you talked about, sounds like a game changer that we really need to get behind as much as any of these. So I guess I'm wondering what our action's going to be to put forth support for that one, and it sounds like most of the other ones as well.
Yeah, that is a good question. And I don't think I came prepared with next steps or action items. I know on the advocacy front that the Street Trust is leading the charge as far as trying to work with groups across the state in supporting that bill. One thought is with these legislative items, I don't know if we have to do additional work, but when we provide that outreach to the ACTs and other groups across the state, could we present to them the information regarding these bills? And I don't know if we can present like what our position is as far as, yes, let's support these bills, and you know, here are the people you can contact within your various jurisdictions. So that's one thought. Michael?
Yeah, so based on the conversation we just had, you know, and it makes sense that we would want to support some or all of these bills. We should start the process of getting that up to the governor's office, because I don't think, you know, I know it was expressly stated that we can't write letters of support to legislators, but I don't think that we can, as OBPAC, go out and beat the pavement about legislation either as OBPAC with the acts without the governor's office's approval. So, so it sounds like our first step should be understanding the bills a little bit better, and then starting the process to get the okay from the governor's office to advocate for it.
Yeah, and I just say I think that some of that, how you do include any of that in outreach to the acts, you need to be careful about what would be considered lobbying, because there is activity that would count as lobbying that is beyond, you know, telling the legislature to vote yes or no for something. So that's something we can get clarity from Lindsay on. But
well, can I just oh, never mind. Clarification would be good.
Well, I was going to say too, I think there's always been the fine line about lobbying and educating. And so I think, you know, Emma and I are making calls in the next couple of weeks to all of the bike ped representatives on the act. So we can certainly mention that there's these very important legislative bills coming up, and to take a look at it, and perhaps you want to weigh in on it. You know, some kind of wording like that. You think that sounds reasonable, Jessica? You're shaking your head.
So I'm shaking the head about the line between educating and lobbying. I know when you're saying we support this, people should vote yes for this, you should tell people to vote yes for this. That is clearly on the lobby end of things. But then there is a lot of education that OBPAC does it as well. And I wish Lindsay was still here.
Yeah, Jeff, I was thinking that it was more on an education level. It's more of, hey, look, these are some of the legislation that may be of interest to you because of X, Y, and Z. And that isn't taking a position. It is just informing folks that the legislation exists, and how it, you know, may impact what they do. And I might have misspoke by just saying the acts, but there are other folks on that list that go beyond the act. And so again, it's just important to understand you know, what restrictions are placed on us and how we communicate this information to other folks who may be interested in bike ped across the state of Oregon. So, but I think we should pursue both, right? We should pursue the letting the governor's office know that these pieces of legislation are important to our committee and getting that approval. But then, you know, can we continue with the education piece too?
Well, I see that's pretty clear. There's a pretty clear line between education and advocating, because advocating is getting somebody to you have to tell somebody what your viewpoint is and or try to get them to come to your viewpoint. Where education, you're just putting the information out there for them to draw their own conclusions on. And so, just like you presented those items to us today, how without commenting on them or without commenting on them and telling us, you know, we should vote for this or we should vote for that, that's clearly education. And if we were presenting that information to anybody else, I can't see how it would be considered anything more than what the state does by putting the list of the bills on the website. So
great.
Yes.
Thanks. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, just, yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think that was a good example that you gave, Michael, that Howe just gave us a list without really advocating. And so we can certainly do that. And just the first one, though, I mean, it's so obvious that we would have to support it. You know, it's going from 1 to 5% and increasing the members of our own committee. So I think that's pretty obvious that we would support that one. But in terms of when I'm talking and when Emma's talking to the ACT members, and we definitely understand the aspect of educating.
I think a point of clarification that I would also mention, I assume you're talking about conversations with ACT members as individuals and not wanting to talk to entire ACT bodies. Okay. Emma's shaking her head. Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought.
Later item.
That's what I thought, because I was like, then they have their whole like level of authority and responsibility thing too. And thank you.
You'll hear our report in a little bit, but it's just contacting specific individuals within the acts.
You know, and this committee should know the conversations that I've had with Lindsay and with other folks within the agency as we've looked at the bike bill language. Is a lot of the content that's in the bike bill language is very consistent with our strategic action plan. I think that there's a strong interest in the agency in working with Howe and our other partner, whether it's Howe or OBPAC, whatever, our other partners at cities and counties, and you know, finding a way forward to really lean into that. So I'm very optimistic by what I'm hearing so far. So if I could give you a nudge and say, and be hopeful and say, gosh, it sure would be great if you worked with us to help work with the partners, because Lindsay is really pretty magical at working things with multiple partners and competing in divergent interests to find something that's going to work. So not everybody may get everything, but it sure would be nice to, well, I can't have an opinion on whether it'd be nice to have something, but anyways, you know what I'm trying to say and not say.
Thank you, Karen. Emma, you have your hand up.
Yes, in the interest of time, I would like to propose that we, if everyone who's here is comfortable moving forward with the Senate Bill 395, move through the process that we discussed with Lindsay of asking to work with ODOT and the governor's office to show support for that one. And then for additional information about the bills, and as the legislative session is evolving rapidly, re-engage in March at our next meeting and just be more informed on all the other ones.
I'd like to call this discussion. When I read through that bill, it puts a pretty good load back onto the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. It brings a couple more people in, but it's also saying like, we're going to be watching all these things. How is that going to play out for? Because when I see it, our playbook is already huge. Like today, we're not going to get through our agenda. And so, yes, I like that bill. I want to be pushing for it, all that good stuff. But is it a realistic ask for our committee? I mean, just before, I want to have that conversation before we move on and go to the next point. Anybody?
So can I comment? So that's what I was saying. I think we should, the first step should be understanding, right? And getting a better understanding of the bill, and then clearly stating what our position as a group, as a board, voting on a position and sending that up to the governor's office. Because the way, based on what I heard about it today, I would probably vote to support it, but I'd also have to admit that I don't know everything about it. Mavis just told me some other things that I hadn't heard yet. So I'd like to do a little bit of research on it.
Yeah, Mavis, one thing that I think like we need to recognize is the work plan that we have crafted is a beast, and it's our own beast that we created. So it really is our fault, right? Like we don't have to do all of these things, and most advisory committees don't. But we have decided as a group that we wanted to craft this ambitious work plan so that we can move these things forward. And I also think that the accountability and transparency piece, I think, is something that is missing from a lot of advisory committees. Maybe the MAC has it, I don't know, but they seem to have a lot of power somehow. But I think that is something that, I don't know, that I think is a piece of that. So, but again, I'm not saying one way or another, but just presenting the information to you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are really far behind, and I want to give everybody just a 5-minute break, and then we can regroup. I don't know how we're going to get through the STIP discussion, the Oregon Community Paths, and the ACT. But Jessica, maybe you have some thoughts on how we can. Go ahead.
How can I, just a point of order or clarification? We're not gonna be meeting again until when? Till March?
March 24th, and that is a jam-packed agenda.
So what's the timeliness of talking about these bills is pretty, I mean, what does it look like as far as when we have to get something up to the governor's office, and when would we be writing letters or advocating, if we were allowed to do that, to be the most effective, and do we have time to do that?
So if I could add a little bit to it, I think what we heard Lindsay say and what I know to be the case is it's typically you have to the end of March where to get legislation, that's, out of committee, about by mid-February if things are going to get traction, if they're getting hearings and so forth. And I also think maybe kind of shifting a bit of the mindset, I don't think it's an all or nothing. It's not a letter of support and here's all the things we support. I think it can be, we support it, these are the things about it that we support, and giving that nod to how, for example, to continue to work the process with staff, if you feel comfortable doing that, if with staff in the governor's office, because the governor's office will, in all likelihood, sort of look to us to see what our opinion is and consider that along with other opinions as we're going through the process. So we really want to work with you. So I would suggest that you not wait until March to say, hey, we want to engage. Just you may not have to know exactly how you want to engage right now, but I would encourage you to put some motion, do some action that enables somebody to further engage with us in some way.
So I would be willing to make a motion that we put the wheels in
Wait,
motion.
wait. Don't we have a motion on the floor? Call for the question.
I don't think it was seconded when I put my proposal forward, which I think is very similar to what Michael was about to state. So Michael, do you want to
Go ahead and maybe I'll
fresh
just
motion?
no. Go ahead and maybe I'll just second your motion because I don't even remember it.
Okay, my motion was proposing, and with Karen's input, this is helpful, that we essentially, as you were going to say, like put the wheels in motion, show that we have strong interest in Senate Bill 395. We haven't figured out all the detailed nuances of the exact verbiage and what we're supportive of or might want to see amended, but we're interested and want to see it moving forward generally. And then we get more information between now and our next meeting, and we decide if there's anything else that we want to engage with. But at least we could start the processing through ODOT and the governor's office on Senate Bill 395 now.
Okay, I'll second that.
So let's open it for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay,
Aye.
so I think that's unanimous. I'm happy to work on this, but I feel like perhaps it could use some fresh eyes as well. So do we have any volunteers to work with me on putting the wheels in motion?
I would volunteer. I'd love to read it and get my feedback out there and be part of that.
Great, I was hoping somebody would volunteer. All right, is that sufficient for folks to move forward? Okay, great. Let's take a 5-minute break and then reconvene at 3:16. Right? Is that 5 minutes? Sorry.
Let's start 3:20.
God, I'm so tired.
3:20.
3:19.
You've created a working group for every single agenda item so far, so you definitely have earned your 5-minute break.
Okay, be back by 3:20. Hey, Jessica, quick question. Do you think we should cover the STIP or the community paths next?
I think that we can cover community paths pretty quickly because we do need to go quickly through the conflict of interest.
Okay.
But we might want to ask Alan just to cover the conflict of interest part, and we can follow up on any questions about any of the other stuff offline, if that's okay.
I can do that.
Oh. Hi, Alan.
Hi.
Hey, Hal.
Yes.
I was just checking in with Jeff, and our item can be a lot shorter, so I would suggest that we do Oregon Community Paths purely like focus on the conflict of interest and just say the dollar amount that's available. Go through the outreach item and try to keep both of those within half hour, and then do STIP at the end.
Okay. We do have about an hour left. So, right? Somebody help me with the time. I'm not.
Yes.
Right? So we do have an hour. And we did build in a buffer for the not on agenda items. So,
So
maybe
I have a meeting. I have a meeting at 5:30, and I need to do some preparation for that. So I may need to get off of this meeting at 4:45 at the latest.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that we'll cover everything by 4:30. That's what I was, trying to figure out. So
Because I have it scheduled till 5.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
when we did
that
the
would
agenda
be
setting, we tried to make it shorter just so we didn't have quite as long a meeting as was initially scheduled.
I sold myself short. I should have said I got to get off this by 4:20 at the latest.
I'm gonna say 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Well, and Jeff, the wise and experienced one, mentioned to me, he's like, I don't know how we're going to get through all of this. So.
Well, you made me feel a lot better when you said we were going to take a break.
It's important.
Okay, we're all back now. And I know Emma already mentioned this, but we can probably do our part in about 10 to 15 minutes. So that'll save us some time.
Okay. All right. So, Alan, if you're ready, I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
All right. Does everyone see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay. I am going to go very fast then. That will let me do it. So schedule, you all have the schedule. I'll just move on. And to the next slide, if it will let me. There we go. Conflict of interest. A public official may not use or attempt to use official position or office to obtain financial gain or avoidance of financial detriment to the public official. The bottom line is that this says that you can't use your position to hurt, to avoid financial hurt, or to give yourself or a relative financial gain. Either through overt or potential actions. Then I'll move on to the next one. There are two types. There's actual and potential conflicts of interest. An actual conflict of interest means any action or any decision or recommendation by a person acting in a capacity as a public official, the effect of which would, and I've underlined would, be the private pecuniary benefit of detriment, this section, or the person's relative or any business which the person's associated with. This is in Oregon Revised Statutes 244.020. The potential conflict of interest is the same thing, except the effect is which could be the private benefit or detriment to the person or their relatives. And the way that I am interpreting this, and I am not an attorney, is that this is a perceived conflict of interest, and saying that if it looks like it may be a conflict of interest, then someone may flag it as a conflict of interest, and you don't want that to happen. So if you think that it may be a conflict of interest, your best bet is to say something. Now, what are the reasons why it may not be conflict of interest? An interest or membership in a particular business, industry, occupation, or other class required by law as a prerequisite to holding by the person of the office or position. And I'll use Mavis as an example. She is on this board as a as a business, a bicycle pedestrian business owner. So that would mean that that this gives her an exception to certain things. B, an action in the person's official capacity which would affect to the same degree a class consisting of all inhabitants of the state or a smaller class consisting of an industry. I can use Mavis again. If it benefits bicycling, it benefits her industry, but if it benefits every bike shop in the state, so then that is an exception. And membership in or membership on the board of directors of a nonprofit corporation that is tax exempt. I'm not sure if anyone on OBPAC is a member of that. And why didn't that go down? So what are some examples? So here we go. ODOT seeks advice of the OBPAC to formulate specifications for a grant program. A city has an employee who is an OBPAC representative, an official representative. The city wishes to submit a proposal in response to the solicitation. 1, the OBPAC representative has no involvement in the project development other than as representative of OBPAC. So they're not part of it as part of their job with the city, so there is no conflict. 2, the OBPAC representative worked on the development of the project and may work on the project if it's so awarded, or also sits on an advisory committee that oversees the project as it's moving forward. That's a potential conflict. 3, the OBPAC representative's spouse owns a bicycle rental shop next to the end of a proposed path. That would be an actual conflict. So those are just 3 examples of where actual, potential, and no conflict would come into play.
Well, okay, Alan, I need to ask a question. How is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, how is
Yes.
number 2? Could you go back a slide and explain to me how your number 2 is a potential conflict of interest and show that to me in there?
Okay, so what we're saying is that, let me go to number 2 here, was worked on the development of the project and may work on the project. Let's say I'm using a consultant as an example. So a consultant, if they work on the project, would have, and then they're part of the approval process for that project with OBPAC. That would be the conflict.
Well, that implies that their employment is contingent upon that piece of work, where you say a consultant, but what if you've worked on the project because it's part of a city project, you're submitting as the city, your job obviously doesn't depend on whether or not this project goes forward like a consultant's might. How would you classify that?
Then you still have a potential conflict because the city itself stands to benefit in your employment, and the question then becomes, is there some type of interest that the city has to have this forward where there would be pressure for you to vote affirmative for a project that otherwise may not be awarded?
Yeah, okay, so I disagree with that because this conflict of interest are specific to persons and persons benefiting from decisions that are made. And I don't see how a person would benefit, for instance, let's say like me or Emma for that matter, if our cities submitted a project, even if we were involved in that project, how I would benefit personally if that project was awarded.
So
Okay.
could I propose that maybe we go through to the end of how we're proposing to deal with actual or potential conflicts of interest and see if that creates any issues for you, Michael, before we debate that finer point any further? Is that okay?
Sure.
All right, so in terms of this, when reviewing projects to be recommended for approval, members must note for the record in the meeting minutes if they have an actual or potential conflict of interest on the 150% list of applications. Members may participate in votes on a project list in its entirety that includes a project for which they have a conflict if they note recusal on the specific project itself where they have a conflict. And then I give an example. Members may not participate in any votes or discussion related to an individual project for which they have an actual or potential conflict of interest. For example, whether the project score should be adjusted, whether projects should be included above or below the cutoff line for funding recommendations. And that's it for the conflict of interest. So in terms of your thing with the city, I understand your perspective, and I have to say that I am not an attorney. So I recognize where you're saying that a city employee who also serves on OBPAC, that you're saying that it is not a conflict of interest. I'm saying that it may be a perceived conflict of interest, but that is a disagreement that I can find the answer to by just asking someone in ODOT's ethics department on that specific question.
Well, and from where I'm sitting, I don't mind not participating in the votes related to my city's proposal. I'm fine with that. I would agree that someone could perceive it as a conflict of interest. I disagree that it meets the criteria of potential conflict of interest or actual conflict of interest. I think perception is something completely different than what the code says potential is. So I'm fine just to be so it doesn't create issues, and to agree to not, and I would advocate for others to agree not to participate in the votes that determine whether or not your project gets funded. But I do disagree that it is a potential or an actual conflict of interest.
Mark has posted in the comments, Mark Gamba posted, is if the body the final decision-making body? If
Mark
not,
is not an advisory committee member, Alan, so.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Perhaps let the chair and Jessica run this. Sorry.
I apologize.
It's okay. I'll read his comment. Mark typed in, is the body the final decision-making body? If not, I'm not sure that conflict is relevant. If you are simply an advisory body, I don't believe it rises. So the question the question is the body the final decision-making body?
So per the administrative rule for the Multimodal Active Transportation Fund, which is mixed in here, OBPAC is functioning as the final recommendation committee. So they are making the final recommendation to OTC for approval. Which is why we're being a little bit more conservative with our interpretations of things.
Well,
so my question is, how is this different than the folks who serve on the Safe Routes to School committee? And are they abiding by the same conflict of interest rules?
That I don't know if Jessica is here. She may be able to answer that.
Yeah, it's the same rules in we're remodeling this, basically using the exact same process that Safe Routes to School has been using.
This is exactly the same that PTAC follows as well. It relates to the perceived conflict of interest, as has been highlighted by a couple of folks.
And then Michael, you have your hand raised up. Feel free to ask
I'll
your
let
question.
somebody else go if they want to go.
You're the only one.
I'm the only one who cares, huh? So I just believe that it's important to not be perceived as condoning perceived conflicts of interest. So I think it's fine for members not to participate in the votes related to the project that their city or they might have submitted. And feel free to contact DOJ and see if I'm full of crap, but I don't believe that what we're doing here and the things that we're talking about here rise to the level of even a potential conflict of interest. But just as Mark pointed out, I don't know Mark, but as Mark pointed out, perception could be that there's a conflict of interest if we're the final decision makers. But the key to conflict is, and this conflict that we're talking about here, the key in the statute is that a person or a person's family or a business that a person owns and relies on for for employment or compensation will gain or a benefit, a monetary benefit based off of a decision that you're making. And that's just not the case with a government employee. So that's my thing, but I'm not going to oppose us not voting on the projects that we
Michael, you muted yourself before you finished the sentence.
That's because I was swearing, but I wasn't. I didn't mean to. My touchpad is a little too sensitive. I was just saying that again, I already said it though. It's as a rule. I think it's a good rule, but it's not statute.
Okay. And then Emma, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm happy to move forward, and I appreciate Michael, you sharing your perspective. I could see, as a public employee who will be submitting a grant application by the deadline at the end of this week, I could see some situations where someone would be spending staff time and getting paid to work on the project if it's funded. So that is a direct compensation and a potential conflict of interest, if I'm understanding it properly. But since we agree with this process, I think it's better to be on the safer side. And if we have agreement with these 3 items, that's great. I just want to note that it also includes discussion. And I think that's important, not only the vote, but the discussion if it's specific to like your individual project and the cut line. Because as OBPAC members, we have a seat at the table, we can speak in our meetings, but other applicants won't have that same privilege. So it's important to level the playing field and just evaluate the projects to best serve the state of Oregon and allocate the funds in the best way possible. So I personally will be not participating in Springfield project discussions.
Does anybody else have any other questions or comments? And Michael, you still have your hand up, so I don't know if you still have a question or comment. Okay. All right. And then Karen put in the chat, we don't disagree with you, Michael. What we have seen from our government employees on advisory committees, they've declared potential or perceived conflict out of an abundance of caution. And then staff guidance is consistent with Emma's point. All right, I'll hand it back to you, Alan.
All right. The last one is on the funding levels and what we are anticipating that we will have in May when the OTC approves the projects. With federal funds, we have, since we have it already allocated, we have 8.2 million available that we can program through 2024. With the state, we are required to go with cash on hand. I checked or received an email yesterday. They told us that we have 2.4 million as of the end of December in terms of the state funds, and we are on track around 3 and possibly a little bit more by June of 2021 when the OTC approves. The bottom line is that what we have available when the OTC approves, we will fund as many projects as we can with what we have available at that time with the state. And then we can build up for the 24 to 27 STIP and have that money known available at the very beginning of that cycle when we start for cycle 2. And that just explains how the process is. Does anyone have any questions on this?
Emma had a question that she put in the chat. She said, can you please remind us if there is a specific split of the funding amount between project refinement and construction portions of the grant program?
When we were developing everything, OBPAC requested a 1.5 million in federal funds be dedicated to project refinement, and then the balance can be for construction. And if I recall correctly, we had about $5 million in LOI request for project refinement.
Yeah, then in relation to, we now have new information with the STIP allocation, knowing that the off-street path funding portion is significantly increased for the next cycle that follows this. I'm just wondering how the application requests compare to those two different segments. And I might be open to trying to kind of even it out a little bit. If one section's way oversubscribed, say that there's a ton of communities that want to do project refinement and could get things ready for next cycle, but we don't have a whole lot of construction requests comparatively. I know all of it's oversubscribed, but I'm just asking to see, like, do we want to revisit that with the new information potentially or not?
Well, we can do that, and when we develop the list, we can develop the list and show what the top project refinement ones are and how they scored in comparison to the construction ones. And we can figure out, are there different scenarios we might play with with regards to federal, with regards to state, and with regards to project refinement in general. And I can bring that before the board.
And Karen will get into that a little bit with the next steps of her STIP discussion of with the new funding and completing this round of grant solicitations, we're going to have an opportunity to revisit, apply lessons learned, stand up all of this new stuff. It's going to be a few months of really kind of rushing to figure out how that's all going to go. While we're also trying to wrap up this round. So
yeah, and
we'll have an opportunity. I don't think we're quite there to start.
Yeah, and I was referring to this round of funding when we look at all the applications. So and that is it for my presentation.
Great. Oops, I think there's a hand up. Jeff.
Yes, that's mine, Hal. Thank you. Yeah, Alan, I'm not going back to the conflict question, but some semi-related to that. What do you feel about someone from a local jurisdiction contacting us directly to more or less advocate for their project, to, more detailed explanation, and then thinking that we're going to take that information onto the committee? Is that a conflict?
No, the people are going to contact you no matter what. I receive questions and PowerPoints and requests to appear at meetings where they discuss public meetings where they discuss the project, and I've just politely declined. But if they contact you, particularly in relation to your official duties outside of OBPAC, there are times when you will have to deal with potential applicants, but it's not a conflict if they contact you and ask for information. However, if they are lobbying you and pressuring you, just politely decline and just say, we have a process that we're following and we will follow that process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
And then Michael, your hand is raised. Okay, do you still have a question? Are you cursing?
You're on mute if you're talking, Michael.
Okay.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
I did the lower the hand thing and thought I unmuted. Okay, so I'll cut it in half. I think in that situation, though, if you do get information that the rest of the group doesn't have, it would be appropriate to share it with the rest of the group so that we're all making decisions on the same information. But I think it'd be a good idea to just say follow the process, and the process shouldn't be giving information to individual committee members.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I need a ruling on that because I've already been contacted with someone asking to follow up next week with more information for me about this particular project in Bend.
So I'm gonna just say for the project selection, there's a reason that we spent a lot of time with the committee going through the scoring process so that we have a very transparent and as quantitative as a fairly quantitative evaluation process. So generally when we do grant review and selection, we have a pretty strong rule of we judge based on what is in the application and can't bring in the other stuff of we know, like I don't work for City of Springfield, but I know Emma works there and I know she puts together good projects. So I'm going to let that influence my score. We can't really do that. So we've set up the process to keep that out of the mix as much as possible, and we really shouldn't be having a lot of that in the discussion with the committee when it comes to making that cut line.
I think that's wise advice. I think we should go by that. In other words, then, someone who contacts us representing a project that's been submitted, we should not have a discussion with them.
Yeah, it's pretty much whatever you're going to tell me, put it in. I'm sure it's great, and put it in your application.
Right.
Write
Okay,
it
I
up,
like that.
add
Good.
it as an addendum that you can attach to your application. So we've got all of it in there, but then everyone has it.
Michael, you're showing us your screen and I'm quite disturbed by what you're looking at, sir. Just kidding. It's your crash data information.
So Jessica, before we move on, I think a lot needs to happen. So I think applications are due at the end of the month and we're supposed to review. Alan, did you have a timeline on next steps that we can look at? And then I wonder if we're going to have to meet before March in order to work on reviewing applications, or if some of this is going to have to be done offline. Like, can you walk us through next steps?
Sure. So in February, we'll provide you with a list of applicants and just a brief description of the project to determine if you have any individual conflict of interest. And we will review the application score and develop the 150% list. On March 1st, we will rank the 100% list and provide them to you in advance so you can review them for the March 24th meeting. And then on March 24th, OBPAC makes recommendations to the OTC.
Okay, so one concern I have is just having that one meeting to make recommendations, because oftentimes what we find ourselves in the situation where we run out of time, right? And then we have to make a decision in like the last 5-10 minutes. And so I'm wondering if there could be an between March 1st and March 24th, if there can be sort of an interim step that we can, an additional step that we have in order to actually take on this work. So.
Yes, that would be up to the committee. I'm game for whatever the committee decides.
Can I offer a proposal that may be helpful and you can have a different opinion? Is it helpful for committee members to have some time to look at the applications and see where you have areas where you have questions, and you could be able to provide those questions where you need additional information that would help be informative to your process? Is that something that could make your in-meeting time more valuable if you're able to get those questions answered in advance?
So Mavis says that would be a good idea. I also think that would be helpful. My other question is, how many applications do you have right now?
We have 60 that are in work. We have 2 that have been received, and the deadline is this weekend.
What are the number of applications that the Safe Routes to School Committee reviews typically?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
I don't know if Mavis.
Let me know if y'all want me to speak.
Or Leanne. Go ahead, Leanne. Yeah.
We had kind of a similar process to what Alan is considering. We had about 100 applications total. which we gave all of that application information to the advisory committee. We also highlighted that sort of 150% list, which shortened it to about. We have a lot more money. We have a lot more money in the safe route, so it shortened it to maybe about 60 applications, I believe. We ultimately ended up funding 43, and what we did is we sent all of the application information out to the advisory committee with a couple of scenarios for them to review, and then collected any questions back from the advisory committee before the decision meeting, so that we had a good idea of what questions that you had. We had a good idea of what scenario you liked the best, so that we could come up with really targeted discussion questions for you during that time that really pointed everyone towards a consensus decision by the end. And we had a 3-hour meeting to do that discussion. I also set up an optional meeting to go over like high level application data analysis. It was like an 1.5-hour meeting, like a month or so before our decision making meeting, just in case people wanted some more high level application analysis, because we knew we weren't going to have time for that in the decision making meeting.
So I wonder if it would be helpful to schedule a similar type of meeting where it's a high-level analysis meeting, which is optional for OBPAC members, but could be available for those who want it. I'm going to throw it out there. I don't know if any of our members have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I support that. I think since we're getting the materials on the 1st of March, that giving us, maybe the 2 weeks to review and send in questions if we have them, and then having a meeting the week prior to our next full committee meeting, so the week of this like 15th through 19th of March would be really helpful for maybe like an 1.5 hours to just kind of get oriented, ask our questions, high level analysis, what are we looking at, so that we can be more effective with the decision making meeting on the 24th.
Okay, do committee members want us to just schedule something the Wednesday before then, or do a doodle poll to see what
I think
works?
we're missing Robert and Aaron. So again, it's hard to make these meeting decisions without, and actually Elliot too. So 3 of our members. So I think a doodle might be the safest bet.
Can do.
All right, any other questions before we move on to Emma and Jeff to give just a quick ACT BPAC update? Okay, I'll hand it over to Emma and Jeff then.
Okay. It's been great working with Emma. She sends out like 3 follow-up emails by the time I'm just going to get a glass of water. So we're talking about contacting the ACTS, Area Commission on Transportation, and specifically their bike ped representatives. So we came up with the task, the schedule, which, interesting enough, our virtual meeting that we have proposed will be right in the middle of when we're reviewing projects. So that's going to be a trick as well. But the first step, we've compiled a list of questions that we're going to ask each of the members that we contact. So there's 11 acts. We have those divided up. And actually, I jumped the gun and I did contact the co-act already. So I got some good information as a preliminary call, and I'll be writing up that, and we'll write up the results of each of our calls. So we're asking them 5 questions with sub questions, and basically what we're, as we've discussed at the last meeting, what we're trying to get at is making sure that the ACT bike ped representatives are aware of OBPAC. How can we collaborate? Is there anything we can do to help you? How can you help us? The whole collaboration aspect of all of this. And also, what are their needs? And just this one call that I made, it came up with some pretty interesting comments, but we'll save that part for later. But I think this is going to be a very helpful project for us in terms of outreach, because I think there's going to be some ACTs who really don't have any clue what OBPAC is all about, and maybe they're not that engaged with their particular ACT. And so how can OBPAC help with that, and vice versa? So just for instance, the COAC people that I spoke to two, the chair, the bike ped representative, and the second, they were very interested in safety, e-bikes. So Mavis, I told them that we were focused on working on the e-bike question as part of our work plan. And I reviewed the work plan with them and told them what we were all about. And I got some good feedback from them. And I think they were pretty familiar with OBPAC, but still it was a good idea. There's the questions. So if you can scroll down just a little bit more. Yeah. So I think we've laid out a pretty good template to get good information from the ACTs. And then we also at our last meeting talked about reaching out as well to the local bike ped committees. And so Emma and I talked about this, and we just decided to go one step at a time. And I guess that's a question for the whole committee, but I think realistically we need to reach out to the ACTs. That's 11 people, and write that all up before we go to the local bike ped committees, which is very important too, but step one and step two. And then finally, we'll wrap this all up with a virtual event, and we're proposing that sometime February 22nd to March 5th, where we would host a virtual meeting with the 11 ACT representatives and talk to them about kind of the same things I just mentioned. What is OBPAC? What is ACT, your bike ped representative, doing at your ACT meetings? How engaged are you? Is this working? What can we do for you? How can we work together better? And the feedback that I got from this one call, there's some definite interest there for sure. And we would like to request how to be the facilitator of that meeting, the virtual meeting, and anyone else would be invited as well. But Emma's volunteered to coordinate the virtual event, and then Emma and I and Hal would be on that call with the bike ped representatives from the ACTs. So I may have left something out there. Emma, what else should we
Thanks,
talk
Jeff.
about?
Yeah, it's been wonderful working with you on this. Jessica, if you scroll up to the top of this document, we have drafted what we thought were the objectives for that virtual session, as well as a draft agenda. During our meeting today, I jotted down the bike ped crash outcomes report, since it sounds like that might be coming out in time to share it at the virtual session. We would love input on if there are additional questions that we should be asking. I noted one earlier that has been added, or actually two of them. So, you know, do these individuals have interest or know others who might be a good fit for the Mobility Advisory Committee bike and ped representative positions? And then with the legislative session, maybe there's some like sharing of, hey, there's some bills in session that, are you aware of them? If not, we can pass along info of these bills exist, just for that educational piece. So yeah, looking for input on what content to do in the virtual session, but really excited about this. It is a decent amount of time we're starting to schedule, and I have multiple hours next week dedicated to phone calls, which I'm excited about. But we're planning to do the two-step process of focusing on the ACTs first, and then the Bike Ped Advisory Committee and Active Transportation Committee at the local level, unless we have capacity to do that now. I mean, I'd love to do them at the same time, but as Jessica said before we went on break, we have work groups for every single agenda item so far today. So my inclination is to try to kick off that next phase, and Hal and maybe Aaron would be interested in helping out. If others want to jump on board, then by all means, but I don't want to spread us too thin. So I think the sequential process is probably best.
So nice work on this, Emma and Jeff. I know it is a lot of work. I do wonder, you know, with the next step, The one-on-one phone calls I think are really great and essential, especially for reaching out to the ACTs. But I wonder with the BPACs and the advisory, the various bike advocacy, if you could do that through some type of virtual session, right? A meet and greet. And then if individuals are interested in having that one-on-one connection, you could follow up with them. And so it would be less of a resource drain. Just a thought.
I like that.
Any questions or thoughts?
I'll just add that this is awesome work that I find really exciting, Emma and Jeff, and you've been doing it all without on your own. So if there is staff support you need, let me know, because
You will want
Well,
a
thank you.
virtual room eventually.
You gave us all
Once
the
we have the time and
contacts.
date, I would love your support setting up the virtual room.
Jessica, what are you doing? You're already doing 2 full-time jobs. Stop.
I'm just lining up
such a
all of the
giver.
cups and making them all, doing that thing where you pour the shots across the rope. They all overflow.
Jessica gave us the contact information, so we really appreciate that. That helped us a lot. But we're going to try to take care of this on our own, Jessica, and not push back too much for your help. But we appreciate any input from you, Jessica, and the rest of the committee as well, of course. So this all sounds good to everyone? Okay. I think I'm seeing heads nodding. Thanks.
Jessica, the only other thing is, if you could get me Aaron's phone number, I'd love to reach out and see if he wants to be a bit more involved in this as well. So,
yep, will do.
Yep. You don't need to take on more, as Karen said.
Yep. And Emma, I can do virtual sessions, so I can set that up. I can do virtual meetings. So great. Thanks again for all of the work that you put into this. Next, then, the last agenda item is the STIP. So Karen, if you're ready.
Yes, was this a ploy to keep me here, or so if I was really annoying, you'd be like, Karen, why don't you go first, and then you could jog on. No, thank you. Jessica, I believe you were going to pull up there's just a few slides, which were the ones that I presented to the commission last week, so we could show that. While Jessica's pointing at that, I think the first thing that I really want to start with is by thanking Hal and Michael and Mavis for your participation in the meeting that we had on January 6th, where we pulled together representatives from PTAC, OBPAC, Safe Routes to School, To Go of Oregon, as well as the Rail Advisory Committee, to help us with reviewing and providing input to our draft proposal on the sub allocation of the non-highway funds. It was a challenge to do because we had the commission meeting in December. Then we had also holidays in, I think it was December. Yeah, early December. And then we had the holidays and we were trying to get the information out and get everyone together. And it was a lot to do in a very short period of time. And I think we would all agree, everyone and anyone who participated, that we would have liked to have had maybe three times the amount of time to have a discussion and to dig into things more so than we did. But I thought it was, I just really appreciated everyone's participation and commitment. So where we landed was consensus with some reservations. There were some concerns about, well, I'll get to the concerns in a minute. So can you go back to the considerations? Wait, what are you showing me?
So this is the one that Kayla had sent out. Do you want the one from OTC?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
I got sent 3 different PowerPoints that were all slightly different.
So. Yeah, I really just wanted to hone in. There we go. on the three, we can just skip down to the 3 slides that pertain to non-highway. And then the next slide. Perfection. Here we go. So we shared with the commission the process that we followed, the engagement that we did, the considerations that staff used in coming up with the non-highway sub-allocation, which was, we focused really around the feedback that we had been hearing, not only from our advisory committee members related to the 24-27 STIP, but also feedback that we hear, the themes that come throughout all of your meetings. Additional stakeholder feedback that the commission had also been hearing throughout this process. You know, I listened to and participate in every commission meeting, so that's all information that we took in as well. We also took into consideration the needs from each of the modal plans. ODOT strategic action plan priorities. So that's the multimodal initiative, increasing equitable access to active transportation options and public transportations. We talked about the climate and the equity lens that the agency is pivoting to layer over the top of everything that we do. We also considered relative availability of other funding options.